Today, we are going to unpack the story of WeWork. Now, this isn't just another business flameout. Oh no, this is a story about a company culture that became so intense, so all-consuming, that it was actually impossible to separate it from the company's massive public implosion. Okay, let's get into it.
This quote, wow, this one line from a former exec tells you almost everything you need to know, doesn't it? It just paints this picture of an environment built less on honest feedback and more on, well, on absolute, unquestioning loyalty. An environment where speaking the truth could cost you your job.
But, before it all came crashing down, there was this incredible dream. WeWork wasn't just renting out desks. They were selling a mission. They were selling community, a new way of life, a promise to, and I'm quoting here, elevate the world's consciousness. And you can see why that vision was so intoxicating, right? It drew in thousands of employees and just a tidal wave of investment.
And that vision was valued at an absolutely mind-boggling $47 billion at its peak in 2019. Think about that for a second. This wasn't just some scrappy startup. It was a global phenomenon, one of the most valuable private companies on the planet, all fueled by this incredible hype and this belief that it was completely reinventing the way we work.
And this wasn't just abstract value, it was real. I mean, look at this footprint. By the end of 2018, WeWork was a legitimate empire. They were physically in 27 countries with over 400,000 members. This was tangible, massive growth that made that dream feel completely and utterly unstoppable.
But, yeah, beneath the surface of that glossy, global dream, a totally different story was playing out. The very same culture that seemed so magnetic from the outside started to feel, well, deeply controlling on the inside. It started blurring that line between an inspiring place to work and something way more demanding.
So when we say cult-like in a corporate setting, what are we really talking about? Well, it usually boils down to these things: an almost religious focus on the founder, a deliberate effort to erase any separation between your work life and your personal life, and this intense pressure to make the company's mission your entire identity. This is the lens we need to understand what happened next.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at this comparison. We're not talking about your typical optional after-work drinks. We're talking about mandatory thank God it's Monday parties, often with tequila shots, and required multi-day summer camps where the whole vibe was just nonstop partying. The goal here seemed to be fusing your work life and your social life into one single thing.
And there it is. That's the core psychological play, right? Frame the company as your family. It encourages this really intense emotional bond. But what happened time and again was this cycle of burnout. A new person would come in, totally bought into the vision, work absolutely insane hours, get completely exhausted by the pressure, and then they'd be replaced by the next wide-eyed believer. This high-pressure, boundary-free zone wasn't just draining people emotionally. For some, it allegedly became a place of discrimination and real danger. And that brings us to the specific human stories, the ones that ended up in formal legal complaints.
First up is Medina Bardi. Now, as the chief of staff to the founder, Adam Neumann, she was literally at the center of power, at the heart of the storm. So her story gives us this incredibly powerful view from inside that executive inner circle. Just listen to that quote again. That's a direct line from Bardi's official complaint. It's an absolutely shocking statement that alleges a culture of deep hostility towards pregnancy and motherhood, right at the very top of the company.
Okay, so let's break down her complaint. First, she alleged that she was discriminated against after getting pregnant, basically pushed aside. Second, an incredible pay gap. Her male replacement was allegedly offered more than 3 times her salary. And third, she claims she was fired in retaliation for raising these issues. It is important to note that WeWork publicly denied all of her allegations.
Next, we have the story of Ruby Anaya. And the irony here is just staggering. She was WeWork's director of culture. The very person hired to oversee the culture was alleging that it was fundamentally unsafe for her and for other women.
Imagine asking that question to your own HR department. Who is safe here? No one is safe. It just captures this profound sense of helplessness, this feeling that the system wasn't there to protect you. It suggests a place where even the person in charge of culture felt completely and totally exposed. So, according to her lawsuit, Anaya was sexually assaulted by colleagues at 2 different company events. When she came forward, she alleged that HR did basically nothing, even describing one of the men as a high performer.
So the takeaway here is pretty chilling. The allegation is that an employee's performance was valued more than another employee's safety.
And our third story comes from Lisa Bridges, the Senior Vice President of Total Rewards. Now, her role is so important because she wasn't just someone who felt there was pay inequity. She was the executive who managed the actual payroll data.
According to her lawsuit, when she found a major gender pay gap and tried to fix it, these were the excuses she was given. Her complaint alleges that these incredibly discriminatory ideas were actually used to justify paying women less than men for doing similar jobs.
In this right here, this is where the internal rot starts to perfectly mirror the external business collapse. The exact same issues that employees were citing in their lawsuits, poor governance, zero accountability, were the things that would eventually send investors running for the hills.
I mean, just look at how fast this all fell apart. Notice how the lawsuits from Anaya and Bridges were filed before the IPO imploded. The red flags were already waving in public. So when the company's messy financials and erratic leadership were laid bare in its IPO filing, investor confidence didn't just stumble. It completely evaporated. And that triggered this death spiral of mass layoffs and, a few years later, bankruptcy.
In just 1 month, November 2019, 2,400 people lost their jobs. These were the very people who had bought into that dream, who had worked the grueling hours, who had treated the company like their family, only to be left with nothing when that $47 billion promise went up in smoke.
And that's really the key takeaway. The toxic culture wasn't a separate problem from the business failure. It was a symptom of the exact same disease. The founder worship that allegedly silenced HR complaints also silenced financial warnings. The lack of boundaries that put employees at risk also led to incredibly reckless business decisions.
So, what do we learn from all this? The WeWork saga is so much more than just a dramatic business story. It really stands as this powerful, modern cautionary tale for all of us, whether we're employees or leaders.
It really forces us to ask this question. When a company demands not just your time, but your entire identity, what is the real price you pay for that sense of belonging? WeWork suggests the cost can be absolutely devastating. Your financial security, your mental health, and even your physical safety.
And really, that's the final lesson here. Company culture, it's not just a fluffy HR side plot. As WeWork proved so spectacularly, it can be the engine of growth, the source of decay, and in the end, it can be the entire story.